Most people think manipulators announce themselves. They imagine arrogance, noise, obvious cruelty. But the effective ones do not begin with force. They begin with observation. They do not walk into a room asking who is the easiest to control. They ask something far more useful. Who is most likely to cooperate with their own capture? The dangerous ones are rarely the loudest. They are rarely the most obvious person in the room. They do not lead with domination because domination is inefficient in the beginning. First, they study. They enter a room and look for what hurts, who needs to feel special, who is performing strength while leaking loneliness through the eyes, who has learned to hide their hunger behind composure. That is what Julian is doing. He is not looking for the prettiest woman in the room. He is looking for the most readable wound. Watch him with Debbie. He does not start by asking what she likes. He watches what makes her tense. He notices how quickly she recovers after discomfort. He sees a person who has learned to normalize emotional disorientation. Debbie looks at him and says, "You're quiet tonight." And Julian gives her a sentence that sounds small, but reveals the whole mechanism. "I notice things." "About me?" she asks. And he says, "About people who pretend they don't want to be noticed." That line works because it gives her two things at once: attention and interpretation. He is not just seeing her, he is telling her who she is. Now watch carefully, because across the same room on the same night, he finds Nora. Different face, different style, same architecture, guarded, polite, carrying an old hunger under polished restraint. Julian does not fall for people, he profiles them, so he approaches Nora differently. He tells her, "You have the look of someone who leaves early without saying goodbye." She gives him a small, skeptical smile. "That's specific." "Only when I'm right," he says. "And are you?" she asks. And Julian answers exactly how someone like him should. "You tell me." That is the scan. Not seduction in the obvious sense. Not affection. Not openness. Profiling. He is placing small interpretive hooks into two different nervous systems and watching which one catches. Once the wound is located, the mirror appears. This is the phase people romanticize because it feels uncanny. They say, "I've never felt so understood." But that is usually the wrong diagnosis. You are not being understood. You are being mapped. A manipulator does not listen the way a healthy person listens. A healthy person listens for truth, for context, for mutual understanding. The manipulator listens for usable material. So when Debbie says, "Most people misunderstand me," Julian does not challenge that. He validates it in exactly the direction that deepens dependency. "That's because most people are threatened by depth," he tells her. Debbie asks, "You really believe that?" And he answers with tailored intimacy, "I think you've been carrying yourself alone for a long time." That sentence is not random, it is engineered. He is giving Debbie darkness, emotional intensity, the feeling of being discovered beneath the performance. But with Nora, the mask changes. Nora says, "I don't usually stay out this late." And Julian replies, "You strike me as someone disciplined enough to leave when a room gets shallow." Nora tells him, "That's weirdly accurate." And he softens the flattery into method. Not weird, just attentive. Do you see the adjustment? Debbie gets emotional recognition. Nora gets intellectual recognition. Debbie gets the language of loneliness. Nora gets the language of discernment. Different math, same mechanism. He does not become who he is. He becomes what access requires. That is why manipulative people can feel so confusing in hindsight. Their charm looks deeply personal, but it is often modular. They are not revealing themselves to you. They are constructing a version of themselves that your wound will trust. Then comes the boundary test. Never dramatic at first. That would expose the game too early. The first violations are always small enough to excuse and sharp enough to register. He arrives late. reads the message and answers hours later, makes a joke that cuts a little too close, and none of these actions are random. He is not testing whether you like him. He is testing how much discomfort you will absorb to keep access to him. Debbie gives the most ordinary correction in the world. You could have texted. Julian smiles and refuses the frame. I didn't realize punctuality was your love language. She says, I'm serious. And he replies, I know. That's why I'm trying to lighten you up. That is how boundary testing works when it knows how to dress itself. He takes her discomfort, trivializes it, and repackages it as a flaw in her tone rather than a problem in his behavior. And with Nora, the same test arrives in a different costume. Nora tells him, you dropped out of the conversation. He answers, and yet here you are. That's not really an answer, she says. And Julian gives her the cool, surgical answer designed to destabilize without escalating. No, it's an observation. This is where so many people fail their own internal alarm. They think the red flag must be loud to be real, but it does not. It only has to make you betray yourself by 1 inch. That inch is the door. Once the boundary survives violation, reward is introduced. Not steady reward. That would create stability, and stability gives the target room to think. He gives relief instead. He cools the room, then returns warmth. He creates tension, then briefly removes it. And this is crucial. The target does not bond to kindness. The target bonds to the end of distress. Julian tells Debbie, you've been on my mind. She looks at him and answers with the obvious truth, you vanished. And he says, and yet I'm here. She tells him, you make everything feel unstable. And like every manipulator who wants to turn your nervous system against you, he gives the diagnosis back to the victim, only because you feel too much. That is the hook. Not when they first flatter you, not when they first mirror you, when you begin managing yourself in exchange for relief. Watch Debbie, watch Nora. Both start self-editing. Softer tone, lower standards, smaller needs. Julian tells Nora, I like that you don't demand things from me. It's rare. And Nora responds exactly how the system trains people to respond. I'm not demanding. That line is devastating because it shows the manipulation has moved inside. She is no longer simply reacting to him. She is adjusting herself preemptively so she can remain acceptable to his system. That is the beginning of the cage. And the cruelest part is that by this stage, the cage no longer needs bars. The target performs the control internally. She monitors her tone before speaking, rewrites the message before sending, questions her reaction before trusting it. Debbie thinks she is protecting the relationship. Nora thinks she is being mature. Both are adapting to manipulation by amputating parts of themselves. And look at how little effort he now needs to expend. You up? He texts. Debbie answers, yeah. Nora answers, still awake. That is all. No demand has to be spoken out loud anymore because the conditioning has already been installed. This is why toxic dynamics can look calm from the outside. The screaming often ends once one person learns to self-silence. He does not need constant force. He only needs to create a world where the other person becomes easier to manage than to meet honestly. That is the playbook. Not love, not fate, design. And that is why so many intelligent people stay too long. Not because they are foolish, because they are being manipulated through the very traits they are proudest of. Empathy, patience, the urge to understand before they judge. Those traits are beautiful in healthy love. In manipulative dynamics, they become access points. Like, subscribe, and hit the bell to be notified because there is one final humiliation left in this system. Even after the mask slips, many people still stay, not because they cannot see the red flags, Because they are in love with who they met in the mirror. Episode 5, Why You Ignore the Red Flags. We are going to look at the psychology of the fantasy and why people fight harder for the illusion than for their own reality. This is the quiet autopsy. I don't judge them, I study them, and I show you the unspoken rules, so you stop mistaking patterns for accidents.